Begin. We're here in Preference today. We have a great topic. Jason Ingram is here to talk about the ExGay Movement. Jason, thanks for being here.
Yes, it's great to be here again, Alan.
Yeah, wonderful. You were here with us on the air last summer perhaps.
Indeed so.
When the slot was filled by the fabulous Out Loud, now retired. And you have an exhibit down at Q Center right now.
Speaking of Q Center, yeah, so it'd be great to have Stacy over there. I was just over there talking to her today, and they're doing a lot of really cool things there these days. So definitely check it out. In the month of August, during business hours and some special events, the gallery should be open. So if you can't make the event on the 13th, then you can come in and check it out and learn a few things about what's going on with conversion therapy and survivors of those kind of programs.
All right, so we'll get into that, but first, tell us about you.
Me, well, I was born in Portland, Oregon here, and my stomping ground was out in the Pearl. That was back in the 80s. I went to Metropolitan Learning Center and finished that in 91 and started making tapes in this.
Wonderful. So take us beyond your graduation from MLC.
Well, I had an untreated mental illness and was just suffering and ended up homeless in Anchorage, and I became a born-again Christian at the age of 20, and I call it the worst and best thing that ever happened in my life because it did rescue me from a lot of things that really could have messed up my life, and I guess I needed more parenting, things like that. It gave me a lot of things that the liberal community growing up and all this kind of stuff, it was good and bad. And so I needed to fill in where my needs were. And then, so the first, 5, 6, 7 years were okay. Went to Bible school as a missionary for a while. And then I started suffering again. And then I started starting to think about my sexuality. And the more I thought about it, I kept feeling and kept, of course, in that culture, what we call fundamentalists or fundies, as lack of a better term, Bible-based Christianity. They believe that being gay is a choice, and a lot of it, that's what it comes down to. And I really thought that this was a product of a lot of different things in my life, especially growing up around the gay community. And so I decided that I was going to be one of these, quote, success stories that I heard a few of them and believed them, and now I challenge them, because what the so-called ExGay movement does is, they don't have a lot of science to what they do, and so they have to get these people to tell these stories about how they've changed from gay to straight. And it's interesting how easy it is to totally expose those and figure out what's really going on.
Well, tell us what some of those success stories sound like.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of them were because they were involved with gay activities that were harmful. And it seems like, strict versions of Christianity don't seem to paint a picture of moderation very well. It's really extreme. You either are, looking for sex in very dark places with a lot of drugs and a lot of, dangerous things and getting diseases, and that's exactly what people do. So they come out of that thing thinking, oh, that's all evil, or they're in a bad relationship, or you have it. Now, here's the thing. You got to consider most of these people that claim to have success stories are actually just bisexual. And they're just flipping. And so my story was, I exclusively dated women before I was a Christian. That was my preference at the time. I just didn't want to explore my other feelings. But it seemed to happen, and I didn't start getting involved with men until my 30s either. So I was in the ExGay movement before I was even intimate with any men. It's just really funny how a lot of these stories are like that. So I'm one of the actual stories of what the ExGay movement really is, except for I suffered a lot of trauma because I went to an actual straight camp. Most of the trauma people experience is being fired from churches and losing their spouse and their family and not being able to see their kids and things like that, because for various reasons. And that's a different type of trauma. So my story was in 2000, I started going to sexual addiction groups for men because that was the closest thing to do in Anchorage because they didn't really have any of those kind of resources there, so to speak. And then I finally just decided I was going to check in to a residential program out in rural Kentucky. And I completed that in 7 months. And then I started just having symptoms of trauma and nervous breakdowns, and I couldn't function. And I had to get on disability. And so that's been, almost 10 years since I got out of the ExGay movement. And I put that in quotes because there really aren't ex-gays. I don't believe. There are people that stop, acting on their feelings. And I don't consider that being ex-gay. They're just not having sex. Mm-hmm. At least with the same gender.
Well, straight camp doesn't sound very attractive. What was it like?
Well, it was, how do I say it? It's really interesting, and I admit today that there was definitely a divine presence there. There was lots of prayer. There was a lot of emphasis on spirituality and spiritual growth. And I can say that I had some experiences, and I think that made me feel like that everything going on at that place was God. God was doing this, God was doing that, because I felt that God was touching my life in certain ways. Was God turning me into a straight person? That actually wasn't happening, and it started scaring me too. But I definitely felt something spiritual going on. Now that being said, just because God, or however you view the divine, is doing something positive to a group of people that are praying and believing, that doesn't mean everything that's going on in that group that God approves of or has anything to do with. So there was a lot of what I call men controlling and feeling justified to criticize and insult and humiliate people on a regular basis. And the other students, many of them had been fired from programs like Teen Challenge, so they had a lot of real street smart type guys in there, and so I was being harassed and having stuff stolen and things like that. So it was actually dangerous. So I did develop a case of PTSD. It wasn't really heavy, but it was enough to where I'm still healing from it, even though it's been a decade.
What's your sense of the experience that other folks that were in this camp in rural Kentucky? What were they experiencing at the same time you were there? Well,
I have gotten to talk to some of them, even recently. They've graduated. They're still doing the same kind of practices as far as I know. Very dangerous, very brainwashing, humiliating, very cult-like practices. And they can all do it legally. They have deep pockets. They have good lawyers. Here's what's interesting is that it seemed like every other guy that came into that program, I had a sense that they were there because they weren't gay, they were straight, they just had sexual issues. For instance, a youth pastor who was messing around and flirting with the girls in his youth group. They don't know what to do, so they send them out to this camp. So it's not just for gays, but a lot of them are. And here's the thing, is that conversion therapy and straight camps, they will never admit that they do conversion therapy. Very rarely. Even the Portland Fellowship says, well, we don't do conversion therapy. I even called them and I said, hey, I'm doing an article about I called it reparative therapy a couple years ago, because there was an article. I just wanted to see if you guys wanted to add anything to that. And right away, this guy is like, we don't call ourselves reparative therapy. It was funny because I didn't even call them reparative therapy. So they're so defensive about that because they say, well, conversion therapy is trying to get a gay person to be straight. And we know that doesn't happen. So we just help them to, and then they give you this weird mesh of words that basically says the same thing. And it was funny though, this one guy said, we're a Christian residential program focusing on sexual issues and da-da-da. And I started so I'm like, oh gosh, that's the same thing they told me to tell people. It's so funny. So funny.
And straight camp, where you were at men and women?
No, this was men only.
Men only.
Yeah.
And did folks need a recommendation, say from a church,
No.
to enter, or you can?
I don't remember. It was very expensive.
Very
So,
expensive.
So,
That was probably the best recommendation, is you give them a lot of money.
So what's the legal status of conversion therapy these days?
oh yeah, so it's a hot topic these days in the state of Oregon because, as you know, they passed a bill saying that it's banned for minors. So it's a tiny step in a bigger
picture. And here's the thing, is that no matter how many laws we make, they're still going to do it. There's still going to be a fragment of people that are going to believe in this stuff. And yeah, it's going to happen. So they banned it for forcing minors to go to these camps. That was about 10 years ago. So yay for that. So what did they do? They send their kids overseas now. So they always find a way around it. And I'll get to that in a bit. This whole international thing, I'll get to that. Wow, it's crazy.
What do we know about what folks are doing here in Oregon?
Well, in Oregon, I am more of what I'd consider myself an artist and a musician, and I try to stay out of politics. I think it's awesome what people do, and I'm totally for them. I'm just too scatterbrained and disorganized to do anything like that. So that's more your area, right?
Well, perhaps, but I know that you did organize around a particular conference last year.
Yes. It was actually, the event was the Restored Hope Network, which I consider to be the later embodiment of the former Exodus International, which closed down 3 or 4 years ago. And this group, the Restored Hope Network, is run by Ann Polk, and you might know her husband, who was ex-gay supposedly, and then came out of the closet and things like that. And I had dialogued with her some, and it was really interesting to kind of see from their perspective. But anyways, the Restored Hope Network, they're an umbrella type ministry. I don't think you could go there and say, I need conversion therapy. And they say, well, we don't do that, and we won't send you anywhere that really does, but we will send you, numbers of places you can go to around the world that will help you with your issues and da-da-da-da-da, and, they give you this big jargon and stuff like that. And anyways, what's going on in Oregon, for the most part, I think is a lot of apathy. I think that this issue, because it's out of the news a lot, and because there's so very few of these anti-gay ministries anymore, and the fact that Exodus International had dissolved, that people don't think it's much of a hot topic anymore. The truth is, there's still young people that are being influenced by this, whether they're getting that kind of therapy or not. It is responsible for so much mental trauma, anguish, and even suicide. And I think that, anybody who was really, really involved in, gay marriage and, marriage equality and things like that, I think this is a great, great issue to get involved in.
So let's talk about what's happening at Q Center.
Q Center, yes. Well,
I have over 30 pieces of artwork. It's my most extensive exhibit that I think I've ever done. It's pieces from the last 12 years. Some of the art I did while I was at Straight Camp and even before that. And then I have some really edgy, very disturbing, even triggering pieces that I'm kind of scared of because people are scared of them. But you should go and see them because they're really cool.
We're chatting with Jason Ingram here on Preference, an Experiment in Queer Radio. We're talking about Jason's current exhibit at Q Center. Exposing the ExGay Movement is...
They called it Mercy.
They called it Mercy. And the topic is exposing the ExGay Movement. And next Thursday...
Yes, on the 13th.
You have a reception presentation at the Q Center to go along with the exhibit. Let's hear about that, Jason.
I thought I would just tell everybody my story, and hopefully we will get a sense of how urgent this situation is and how different it is. I used to do a production called Identity Thieves, and it was kind of a performance piece. And my inspiration was Peter Toscano, who is a character actor, and he traveled with this show called Doing Time at the Homo Nomo Halfway House. He's absolutely brilliant. And I thought, I need to tell my story, and I do art, video, and music, and I'm not really good at either one of them, but I thought if I do all of them, maybe it'll look good. And so after doing a thing in Memphis back in '08, I decided to put together a whole thing, and I went up north of Seattle and did a presentation at a church in 2010, and I've been doing it about every year, and every now and then somebody will contact me. This was nice. I wasn't going to do this year. Actually, the event last year was actually traumatic for me. There was some events that happened alongside of it, and I don't want to get into it right now, but it was extremely painful, and it was a hard time in my life.
Wonderful. We're chatting here on Preference with Jason Ingram. You mentioned the international scope.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I just sort of glanced at the Portland Fellowship website, and it looks like the fellow was speaking in Korea. So I thought, and Korea is such a Christian nation, so these guys that consider themselves ex-gay are now taking this and focusing on other countries. And, they don't like to call it conversion therapy, reparative therapy. They come up with new terms and new methods about every couple of years because what they do doesn't work. It does way more harm than good, and especially to young people. It's going underground, and that's one of the reasons why people really don't know about this these days. And it's not a hot topic except for, this legislation thing. But they have managed to bombard the internet and get stuff out in other countries. And I tell you, when it comes to being gay and when it comes to church stuff, and especially when it comes to American missionized Christianity, this is huge. I was a missionary in Russia, and I know that they they worship Jesus, but they practically worship America too. So whatever we do, they do. It's the same thing with Mr. Smiley that went to Africa and brought his anti-gay gospel out there. And it's happening all over the world now. I don't know how many nations are affected, but I would love to have stuff translated into Spanish, Russian, and hopefully Korean.
It's one of our odder exports at a time where we are having this really interesting discussion about rights for queer folks of different kinds, and a conversation that's thickening, even if it's not necessarily reaching the needs of everyone. And yet here we have these folks who, are fleeing a climate that's less hospitable to homophobia, for more welcoming shores, or I'm not even sure how to describe it. The sense that folks must have of what it is that's being brought to their doorstep.
Well, it's interesting how so many countries in the world already have a very anti-gay mentality. So bringing in a new religion, and one that's, especially Pentecostalism, is just huge, widespread. And they get so excited about, we finally have an answer to what to do with gays. Instead of kicking them out, let's change them. And for them, that's an act of compassion. And that's one of the things that's hard for it, is because it looks like they're doing such good things. And they even feel like they have the right motives. And it looks like compassion. And in fact, that even makes it more dangerous, because you swallow the pill, because it's a nice, sweet thing. It's like, oh, they're so nice. I mean, and these people that run the ExGay Movement now, they're all about, PR and trying to act more liberal and trying to come off as being more liberal and accepting. But here's the thing, is that if somebody believes that somebody is not born gay, that they choose that, if that's the way all LGBT people are, okay, they can keep that belief to themselves. But if they're going to impose that onto other people, especially young people, then we need to do something. We just can't sit there and let these people poison the minds of young people and bombard the internet and go across, to other nations and spread this stuff. We need to really act up. And I can't think of a better time than now because people are interested in it. We're one of the first states that had a ban on conversion therapy for minors. And it'll go from state to state like marriage equality did. And then before you know it, we're going to be banning all forms. And we're going to make it so difficult that people are going to think, wait a minute, if I'm going to go to an anti-gay therapist, maybe there is something wrong with it. Because if we don't, make it very clear to the world that this is wrong, that this is harmful, people might not know it. I'm not necessarily for people yelling and holding signs, yet if there's nobody out there saying that this is wrong, there's a lot of people that might not even question whether reparative therapy, conversion therapy is wrong. I didn't question it, and my family was all against it. And I knew better, yet I was driven, and I was stubborn. Yet I'm really glad that there were people in my life to tell me that, not to go to straight camp and not to do this because it was harmful. And therefore, I made a choice, either to listen to them or not. And I chose to go through this stuff. And by the grace of God, I'm sitting here today and I survived. It's amazing how many people take their lives that have gone through these things, especially these straight camps. And if they don't, many of them are still full of shame. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to go public about it. And a lot of them end up in very intense, whether it's PTSD or whatever it is, a lot of them end up with serious substance abuse problems. The problem about the suicides with ex-gay people, and again I'm saying that in quotes, is that we don't have the numbers like we do with people that are dying of HIV/AIDS. I'm not saying that this is any comparable to the AIDS crisis. I'm saying that it's really hard to pin them down because we're talking about a society that is very secretive, and not only that, they're going underground a lot more when it comes to being public, and they're definitely working on their image. That they're the same thing. It's the same thing they've been doing for decades, saying that, oh, we love these people, we accept them, therefore we're going to change them, and that's why we accept them, because they want to be changed, and da-da-da-da-da, instead of saying, this is what they were born, God made them this way, they're special, and we're going to treat them just like everybody else. And that's what I demand from churches. And it's hard because we can't expect a very stubborn religion that is trying to pick and choose all these different Bible scriptures, because nobody can live all of them, but they happen to pick ones that fit, a culture that maybe existed 50 to 100 years ago. And then every couple of generations, somebody says, hey, we can play electric guitars and not go to hell. And then, oh, great, we can play electric guitars now. And, oh, we can have beer now. Oh, good. And so I think down the road, they're going to eventually say, hey, we're going to let a trans person or a lesbian person or a bi or a gay person be able to lead worship and preach and run a church. And, I think in the future, they're all going to be that way. And there'll be just a few remnants of people, like there are churches, like I went by a church in Kentucky, that was an actual white supremacist church. But those are very few. And I see a world in the future that is going to have LGBT people not even need rainbow flags anymore, because it'll be so normal.
If someone was listening and they were considering or participating in this conversion therapy, what would you advise them?
I would really have to meet them on where they're at in their faith. They really, really love God. They really sincerely want to do the right thing. And they feel like that being LGBT is not a part of them, that it's coming from some kind of spirit or some type of abuse or something in their past or their family, and they feel like they have to get rid of that demon or whatever. And I'm saying that, okay, if it's not working, then challenge it and study the Bible and pray. That's how I did it. It was funny though. I don't consider myself a Christian anymore, yet being a Christian and studying the Bible and praying actually helped me to come out of the closet. And coming out of the closet helped me to be closer to God, because I wasn't carrying this shame that was like hindering my prayer and my faith. So it was amazing what coming out of the closet did for me and for my Christianity. I know that sounds really weird to some people.
The Metropolitan Community Church. I'm hoping to start my own band later this year. And it's very much reminiscent to the kind of avant-garde and ambient and experimental stuff that I was listening to in my teens, thanks to KBOO and the library. And so it's kind of like long Pink Floyd songs with progressive rock and Tangerine Dream, The Planet Gong, all that kind of fun stuff. So hopefully it'll be very Portland.
Yeah. Remember going to the library and checking out cassettes?
Well, it was all vinyl. Karl-Heinz Stockhausen was one of the things that I remember going, wow, when I was like 15, and some of this amazing stuff. So growing up here was just wonderful. Like I said, my 12 years, being a fundamentalist Christian, 20 years identifying as a Christian, was one of the best things in my life. And I think there's a place for them. They took me in when I was homeless. They have this wonderful depth as far as, making sure your heart is pure, your motives are pure, that you're being mindful of the needs of others. Bible-based Christianity is absolutely wonderful. I just hope that they listen to us and know when they're doing things that are harmful. And we need to speak out against it. And conversion therapy, reparative therapy, whatever the heck they call it, whatever week it is, because they keep, trying to dodge these terms that we're giving them, is so harmful. And yes, they're motivated people. And they really need to know, and the people that are thinking about going into some type of programs or therapy, whether it's free or whether they, whatever it is, if you're trying to change your sexual orientation, really find out what you're getting into. And, okay, go ahead, yeah. I think it's time to go. I could go on and on about it. But I'm going to go on about it anyways on the 13th. Yeah, so August 13th, I'm going to be talking about my story, about my 5 years involved in anti-gay religious work to try to turn me into a happy heterosexual. And I'm showing my art, over 30 pieces, and I'm going to keep my clothes on the whole time.
Jason Ingram, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, it was great to be back here.
We are Preference, a queer experiment in radio. We're going to close out with a little bit of music from Bobby Humphrey.
Yeah. Find out what you can do, whether it's little or big. I don't need any of your money. I don't even need to put you to work. I just want you to get creative and find a way that you can do your activism and really, really take on this cause.
Could I just tell them I have my clothes on?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
I like to be funny. Actually, there's a lot of humor in my exhibit. Sorry, you said at 55 we were supposed to end, or
No, it's good.
I was
It's all
supposed
good.
to speak about that. Okay,
I'm
that's
not.
cool.